This is an interesting one because I guess this gets to the heart of probably Netflix valuation, the whole free cash flow versus owner earnings kind of discussion. So this is on Twitter from Devon Toogood. What is Hamish's view on what proportion of Netflix capex is maintenance capex and what's growth capex? Do you want to maybe
Yeah.
firstly just give a bit of background on why that's important, particularly for Netflix, and then maybe give us some of your thoughts on
Yeah,
it?
so that's probably one of the major questions around Netflix as an investment is how much of their content spend is just to keep their existing sub base and how much of it is to drive growth. And the reason for that is because Netflix themselves, so how their content works is they spend money on the content, and it creates a content asset essentially. And then on the income statement, that will be amortized, so it's kind of depreciated by the company, and they kind of depreciate a proportion, and that means that the operating income on the income statement is very different to kind of the operating cash flow, where the operating cash flow is kind of subtracting all of the content spend, whereas the operating income is just subtracting the used up content spend. So that's kind of the difference. And of course, as value investors, we care about cash flow. We care what we can pull out of the business at the end of the day. So a big consideration is how much of their content spend is just to keep their sub base as it is, and how much of it is they're actually just choosing to invest more to grow in some of these international markets. And there's a lot of ways that you can go about estimating this. There's a few different ones. One of the main ways that you can do it is simply by taking management's amortization figure as the maintenance capex. And there's a couple of good reasons why that may be a reasonable way to think about it. When it comes to physical assets, depreciation often is a terrible estimation of the value decline in those assets. But when we're talking about a company that is basically able to assess how much watch time every piece of content gets, there's pretty good reason to believe that Netflix would have a pretty good grasp on which content is still driving value and which content is no longer, or let's say 95% of the value has been gone. Like it's gotten 95% of its watch hours, and now it just gets the occasional person who revisits it. So there's a good reason to believe that management has enough data to actually do that amortization calculation fairly accurately. But then there's other ways you can go about it as well. You can try and do your own estimation, whether that's looking at where content spend is around the world and making a projection that, well, they don't have many subs in this region and they're spending a lot of content, so that content spend is likely mostly growth expenditure. So there's kind of different ways you can go about it, but that's how I'm thinking about it. And then I'm using kind of multiple methods and combining them, and there's no exact figure that I'm getting to, but I'm getting to kind of an approximate of where I feel that it's very likely that when I'm buying the stock, I'm going to do well. That's where it comes back to at the end of the day.
Nice. Could you also speak a little bit to how that amortization impacts the tax situation at Netflix? Because potentially there's some incentives, I guess, in place there that could change how you might think about that.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, you could definitely make the argument, and I did in a previous video where you could make the argument that they could overestimate amortization in order to lower their tax. You could definitely make that argument. You could also make the argument that they would want to lower their amortization to produce higher operating income to satisfy the market. So I think you can argue it both ways. Um, but combining what I know about the management team and the information they provide about how they amortize and just the nature of their business, I think look, using their amortization is a fairly reasonable way to approach it. Whether it's exact, I don't know. But yeah, it's certainly different to a business that's, if a business is spending a lot of money on machinery and vehicles and office equipment and stuff, those things have depreciation schedules that are basically just accounting paperwork, that it's completely separate from the actual loss in value of those assets. And that's very different to Netflix, which is kind of, I can view it similar to if I had to value my content. I know on average where all the views are going to come. Most of the views are going to come in the first 24 hours. And then after that, I can say after a week on average, 90% of the views have come in for the average video. And that's what you actually see in Netflix's report. They say on average, about after 4 years, 90% of the content has been amortized, that the 90% of the value is gone. So my presumption, and I'm only presuming, I don't know, but my presumption is that they're using kind of the process that I just explained for my YouTube channel. They're doing a similar thing to their content and valuing it based on how much watch time there is left. And they would have an enormous amount of data on that. So there's good reason to think that they could be fairly accurate on it, except for, of course, the occasional show coming back in a way that they didn't expect, which is only going to add, a positive effect to the valuation.
If you enjoyed this clip, check out the full episode here and subscribe here. Thanks for watching.